A billionaire CEO bet me her $200,000 Lamborghini that I couldn't fix the Porsche three different shops had already given up on. She made that bet with a cold little smile, standing in my leaky-roofed garage in front of my 8-year-old daughter. The exact kind of smile rich people use when they've already decided you're a piece of furniture that happens to talk. I fixed it with a part that cost $6.49. But I'll tell you right now, that $6 part is not the part of this story that matters. Not really. The part that matters is what that fix bought my little girl. And what it did, months later, to the coldest, most heavily armored woman I have ever met in all my life. My name is Eli Brandt. I'm 42 years old, and I fix cars for a living out of a one-bay shop with a roof that leaks when it rains hard and my daughter's crayon drawings taped up all over the office wall. And the day a Lamborghini ended up signed over into my name was the day everything changed for the two of us, but not for the reason you're thinking, and not in any way that a single soul standing in that shop could have seen coming. But before I tell you about the bet, and the $6 part, and the thing that woman did at the very end that I still can't talk about without my throat closing up, do me one quick favor. If you have ever been treated like you were nothing by somebody who never once in their life did an honest day's work with their hands, hit that subscribe button right now. This whole channel is built for the people who get looked at like furniture. Go on, I'll wait. Then, let me tell you how all of this really started, which is the way that every single thing in my life starts. With my daughter. My daughter's name is Nora. She's 8 years old, and she is the entire reason my heart still bothers to beat every morning. And I need to tell you something about Nora right up front, because without it, none of the rest of this makes sense. Nora is sick. I'm going to tell you about it plainly and simply, because I have learned over 4 hard years that dancing around the thing doesn't help anybody, least of all me. Nora has a heart condition, a defect she was born with, one of the kinds that doesn't always announce itself right at the start, that hides quiet for a few years and then one day stops hiding. For a good while it was managed. Medication, regular checkups, a careful eye, and otherwise a mostly normal life for the two of us. School, and grilled cheese and cartoons, and her helping me in the shop. And then it started getting worse, the way the doctors had always warned me it one day might. And the pediatric cardiologist sat me down in one of those small, cold rooms with the bad lighting and told me, as kindly as a person can tell you a thing like that Nora was going to need surgery. A real one. Open heart. The kind of surgery that comes with a number attached to it that made the whole room tip sideways while I sat there nodding like I understood. But I want to back all the way up and tell you the hardest part of it, because it's the thing that explains everything about who I am and why I did what I did. Nora's mother left us when Nora was 4 years old, and I'm not going to stand here and run that woman down, because my Nora is going to be old enough one day to find this and watch it, and I will not have my daughter ever hearing her father tear her mother to pieces. So I'll tell you the truth of it as gently as I know how. When the diagnosis came, when the real weight of it finally landed on us, the endless appointments, the medications, the fear that lives in your chest at 2 in the morning, the terrible not knowing, she could not carry it. Some people, it turns out, aren't built for the long, hard road, and the cruel thing is they don't find that out about themselves until they're already standing at the very start of it, looking at how far it goes. One morning, she was there at the kitchen table, and by that same night she was gone, and it has been just me and Nora ever since. 4 years. The two of us, together, against a thing that is far bigger than the both of us put together. So, when people ask me why I work the hours that I work, why I take every single job that rolls through that bay door, why I never once said no to that ridiculous Lamborghini bet, even though every sensible bone in my body was screaming at me to walk away from it. Well, that's your answer. Her name is Nora. She's 8. She draws pictures of the two of us holding hands and tapes them to my shop wall where I'll see them all day. And she needs a surgery that I cannot, on a one-bay mechanic's income, even begin to afford. That is the engine running underneath every word of what I'm about to tell you. Keep her in your mind, because I never stopped having her in mine. Now, let me tell you about the Porsche. It came in on a Tuesday, towed in on a flatbed, because it wouldn't run right. It would start up fine, then idle, all rough and lumpy, and then, after a few minutes, it would drop into what the high-end cars call limp mode, which is when the car's computer essentially panics and throttles the whole engine down to a crawl to protect it from whatever it thinks is going wrong. The owner wasn't with the car when it arrived. It came to me on a referral, a fellow who knew a fellow who'd told him, "You take that thing to Eli Brandt. He's the last honest mechanic left in this town, and he can fix just about anything with 4 wheels." And taped right there to the steering wheel was a thick stack of paperwork that told me the entire sad story of that car before I had even gotten the hood up. 3 shops, 3 of them. 2 were full dealerships. That poor car had already been to 3 separate shops, and every single one of them had done the same thing. Thrown expensive parts and expensive labor at it, and sent it back out still broken. One shop had replaced the mass airflow sensor, a few $100s, didn't fix a thing. Another had reflashed the ECU, which is to say they reprogrammed the engine computer. More money, didn't fix a thing. And then, the last one, the big, gleaming dealership with the marble floors and the espresso machine in the waiting room, had finally thrown up its hands and written down the magic words that let a shop off the hook entirely. They recommended a complete engine control module replacement, and they suggested that the entire wiring harness might need to come out and be replaced too, and for all of this they had quoted, and I promise you I am not exaggerating by a single dollar, $11,000. 11 grand. For a car that I would have bet my own shop before I ever turned a wrench on it, had something small and stupid and cheap wrong with it. Because here is the thing about my trade that nobody on this earth respects until the day they desperately need you. The great majority of catastrophic, huge, wallet-emptying car problems are actually small, cheap problems wearing a great big, scary costume. And the technicians at those 3 shops, I want to be fair, they weren't stupid men, they were fast. That's the whole difference, and it's everything. They plugged the car into the computer, they read the trouble code that the computer spat out at them, they replaced the specific part that the code pointed its finger at, and then when that didn't fix it, they escalated, straight up to the most expensive possible answer on the menu, because the most expensive answer is the one that turns the problem into somebody else's wallet and gets the car out of their bay. What not one of them did, what almost nobody in my whole industry does anymore, and it breaks my heart, is the slow, boring, quiet, humble work of actually listening to the car. Of chasing the problem patiently back to where it actually lives, instead of just where the computer's flashing light claims it lives. So that, the slow, boring, humble work, is exactly what I did. I took 2 whole days with it, fitting it in between my other paying jobs, with Nora set up at the desk in the office doing her spelling homework and wandering out every 20 minutes to hand me precisely the wrong tool with total confidence and tell me about her day. And I traced it. The rough idle, the limp mode, and most important of all, the intermittent nature of the whole thing. It would act up, then it would run fine, then it would act up again. It all kept pointing me gently toward the air and fuel mixture being off somehow. But every sensor I tested checked out fine, so I went smaller. And then smaller still. And on the afternoon of that second day, lying on a creeper under that car with a flashlight in my teeth and a little inspection mirror being as patient as I know how to be, I finally found it. A vacuum line. One little rubber hose, about the diameter of a pencil, tucked away behind the intake manifold in a spot where nobody ever thinks to look because it's a pain to reach. And it had a crack in it. A tiny hairline split, maybe a quarter of an inch long, in a cheap, aging rubber hose. And here is the beautiful, simple, infuriating logic of it, the thing those 3 shops never caught. When that engine warmed all the way up, the heat made the rubber expand, and that expansion pulled the little crack open, and the engine started sucking in extra air that the computer wasn't measuring. Unmetered air, we call it. And that threw the whole fuel mixture completely out of whack, and the computer, sensing everything had gone haywire, panicked and dropped it into limp mode. And then, when the engine cooled back down, the rubber contracted and the crack sealed itself back up, and the car ran perfectly fine again. Which is the exact and entire reason the fault was intermittent, and the exact and entire reason 3 different shops chasing flashing computer codes had never once managed to lay eyes on it. A cracked vacuum line. That's all it ever was. The replacement, a length of the correct German specification rubber hose, cost me $6.49 at the parts store down the road. The repair took me about 20 minutes, most of which was spent reaching the blasted thing. An $11,000 problem, according to the experts. A $6.49 fix, according to the truth. I didn't trust it right away, mind you. I never do. I drove that Porsche for a full day to be dead certain. I got it good and hot. I sat in stop-and-go traffic with it on purpose, which is where limp mode loved to show itself. And it ran like a dream, smooth as glass the whole time. Only then did I call the number on the paperwork to tell the owner her car was finally, actually ready. And that is the moment I found out exactly whose Porsche I'd been sleeping under for 2 days. She swept into my little shop the following afternoon like the whole building ought to feel lucky she'd graced it. Margot Cross. And if you follow business news even a little, you might just know that name, because she ran a company you've definitely heard of, and from what I gathered, she ran it like a straight razor. Everything about her was expensive. The suit, the watch, the way she held her chin. She had the particular kind of presence that comes from being told you're brilliant so many times, by so many people who want something from you, that at some point you simply stopped checking whether it was still true. She took one slow look around my place, at the leaky roof, at my daughter's crayon drawings taped crooked all over the office wall, at my coveralls with Eli stitched in red thread over the pocket, and I watched her file me away, instantly and completely, into the little drawer where people like her keep people like me. "So," she said, and she wasn't even really looking at me. She was looking down at her phone, thumbing through something more important than my face. "The little neighborhood shop believes it succeeded where actual trained professionals failed. Do tell. What was it? And I'd be honest if I were you, because I will absolutely have this independently inspected." So I told her, plain and simple, a cracked vacuum line, a $6 part. I told her that the dealership's $11,000 diagnosis had been flat wrong from top to bottom, that there had never been one single thing wrong with her engine or her computer, that they had simply been chasing codes around in a circle, instead of taking the time to find the actual cause sitting right there behind her intake. And she laughed at me. Not a real laugh, a small, cold, disbelieving little exhale through the nose, the kind of laugh that's really a door closing. She informed me that there was simply no possible way that a problem which the certified master technicians at a world-class dealership had quoted $11,000 to repair had in reality been a $6 rubber hose, discovered by, and here she lifted one hand and gestured vaguely at my whole life, at the shop, at the leak, at the drawings, at me, by this. She decided, right out loud and to my face, that I was therefore either a liar or simply incompetent, that I had most likely just reset the car's computer, gotten lucky, and that the very same problem would come roaring back within the week, and that she most certainly was not about to take the word of some backyard operation over the considered judgment of a certified dealership. Now, I should have just let her pay her bill and climb back into her perfectly running Porsche and drive out of my life. That's what the smart, tired, sensible part of me wanted to do. But my Nora was sitting right there in the office doorway, 8 years old, swinging her feet, watching this glittering stranger look at her daddy like he was something unpleasant she'd found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. And I think that more than my own wounded pride, is why I said what I said next. I said, "Ma'am, your car is fixed. I will stake my entire reputation on it. You go ahead and drive it just as hard as you please, for just as long as you please, and it will run perfect because I found the actual problem, which, with respect, is a good deal more than 3 other shops and all their certified professionals ever managed to do." And that, right there, is the moment she made the bet. I'm certain she meant it purely to humiliate me. I think she was so completely, bone-deep certain of herself, so accustomed to being the smartest and the richest, and the single most important person in every room she ever walked into, that she genuinely could not conceive of a universe in which the grease monkey in the leaky garage was right, and her gleaming dealership was wrong. She fixed me with that cold little smile, and she said it loud enough for my daughter to hear every word. "All right, then I'll make you a wager since you're so very confident in yourself. I will drive this car for 1 month, 30 days, And if your little $6 miracle holds and absolutely nothing goes wrong with it, then I will sign over my Lamborghini to you. The one sitting in the showroom downtown. It is worth more than this entire building and everything inside of it, very much including you. And if it fails, when it fails, you will refund me every last cent I've paid you, and you will put a sign up in that filthy front window of yours that says, in plain words, that you are not qualified to lay a finger on German engineering. Do we have a deal? It was a cruel bet. Make no mistake about that, it was engineered, start to finish, to make me back down, to make me stammer and admit I wasn't really sure, to put the small man right back in his small place where she felt he belonged. In her mind, that Lamborghini was never actually at risk. It was a prop, a stage light, a thing she was waving around precisely because she could not imagine, even for a second, ever losing it to a man like me. But I had just spent 2 days underneath that car. I knew exactly what I had found. I knew that cracked little hose was the beginning, the middle, and the end of the entire story. And I had an 8-year-old girl sitting behind me in a doorway who needed a surgery on her heart that I could not begin to pay for. So I looked Margot Cross dead in the eye, and I put out my hand, and I shook hers, and I said, "Deal." She drove off in a flawlessly running Porsche, absolutely certain she had just set a clever trap for a fool. A month went by, and I'll be honest with you, it was a hard month, one of the hardest. Not because I had even a flicker of doubt about that car. I didn't, not for 1 second. It was hard because Nora had a bad spell right in the middle of it. A scary one. A night in the hospital, monitors beeping, a young doctor using careful words that reminded me with brutal clarity that the clock ticking inside my daughter's chest was not going to politely wait around for me to scrape together $11,000, let alone the far, far bigger number that the surgery itself was going to cost on top of everything. I sat in a hard plastic chair beside her hospital bed that night, listening to her breathe, and I did the same math I did every single night, the math that never once came out right no matter how I worked it. And for the very first time, I let myself think about that Lamborghini, sitting under its lights in a showroom downtown, and I didn't think about it as a toy, or a trophy, or some rich woman's prop. I thought about it as a number. I thought about it as my daughter's heart. The Porsche ran perfectly, of course, all 31 days of that month. Not a single hiccup, not a stumble, not one flicker of limp mode. The hose held, because a correctly diagnosed and correctly installed $6 hose is every last thing that car had ever actually needed. And here is where Margot Cross surprised me for the very first time. Because plenty of people like her, when they lose a bet they were dead sure they'd win, they simply don't pay. They lawyer up, they stall you out. They make it quietly disappear and dare you to do something about it. I had honestly half expected to never hear from the woman again. Instead, exactly 1 month to the day later, she came back to my shop. And she was quiet, strangely quiet, none of that razor in her voice, and she walked up to my counter and she set down a set of keys, the Lamborghini's keys, and beside them the signed title, all the paperwork in order. She had lost a fair bet, and whatever else that woman was, it turned out she paid what she owed. "It runs perfectly," she said, and the words came out stiff, like they hurt her on the way past. "I had it inspected, 3 times, 3 independent shops. They all confirmed your diagnosis." It plainly cost her something real to push that last word out. And then I did the thing she absolutely, positively did not see coming. I didn't whoop. I didn't pump my fist. I didn't gloat, not even a little, not even after a month of being treated like dirt. I just picked up those keys off the counter and I said, quiet and even, "Thank you, I'll be selling it." And something flickered across her face. Surprise, and maybe even a flash of something like offense, as if to say, "You just won my Lamborghini, and you're going to sell it." And she said, almost before she could stop herself from saying it, "You're selling it? Whatever in the world for? Do you have any idea what that car—" And then she stopped. She stopped cold in the middle of her own sentence. Because she had stopped looking at me, and she had started looking past my shoulder, at the wall. She was looking at Nora's drawings, and there, taped right in the middle of all of them, was one that I had never once been able to bring myself to take down. A crayon drawing of a little girl lying in a hospital bed with a great big red heart drawn on the front of her chest. And next to the bed, a stick figure man with brown hair holding the little girl's hand. And above the whole thing, written out in a child's slow, careful, wobbly letters, "Me and Daddy, brave." Margot Cross went absolutely, completely still. "Whose drawing is that?" she said, very quietly, and every last trace of the blade was gone out of her voice. And I don't entirely know why I told her. Maybe it was because I was so tired all the way to the bone. Maybe it's just that 31 days of sitting in hard chairs beside a hospital bed will strip every last ounce of pride right out of a man until there's nothing left but the truth. But I told her. All of it. I told her about Nora's heart, about the surgery she needed and the number on it, about the mother who had stood at the start of that long, hard road 4 years ago and found she couldn't walk it. And I told her why a man takes a cruel stranger's humiliating bet without so much as blinking, because that Lamborghini she had been so absolutely certain she could never lose was, to me, from the very first second, never once a trophy. It was a surgery. It was my little girl's whole entire chance to grow up and be a person. I had been planning to sell that car the very instant she put those keys in my hand, and every single dollar it brought was going straight to the one place it was always meant to go. My daughter's surgery. The silence that filled up that shop was the loudest thing I've ever heard in my life. The woman who had looked at me and my child like we were furniture not 1 hour before, the woman who had carefully built an entire bet for the express purpose of humiliating me in front of my own little girl, stood there in the middle of my leaky-roofed garage and slowly put one hand over her mouth, and her eyes filled up and spilled over. And all that armor I had so completely assumed went all the way down to the bone. It turned out to be just a shell after all. Just a hard shell with a frightened person hiding somewhere down inside it. Because here is the thing I did not know about Margot Cross that day, the thing I would only come to learn slowly, in pieces, over the long months that followed. She had grown up with nothing. With less than nothing. She had clawed and scraped her way up and out of a childhood so cold and so hard and so frightening that she had built that armor onto herself completely on purpose, one heavy plate at a time, swearing a child's furious oath that she would never, ever be powerless or poor or overlooked again as long as she lived. And somewhere along the way, somewhere in the long building of all that armor, she had slowly, without ever once meaning to, become the very thing that had hurt her so badly in the first place. She had spent 20 hard years proving over and over that she was the smartest and the richest and the most untouchable person in every single room. And she had never once, in all that time, stopped to wonder what it actually cost the people she looked straight through like furniture. And now here, standing in front of her, was a man who had nothing. A leaking roof, a box of $6 parts, a second-hand creeper, and a sick little kid, and who somehow, impossibly, had more than she did. A man who had a daughter that drew pictures of him as a hero and taped them where he'd see them. A man who had taken her cruel bet not out of wounded pride at all, but out of a pure, fierce, uncomplicated love for one little girl. She didn't say very much else that day. She left quietly, which I would later understand was not at all like her. But the thing is, she came back. The very next week. And then the week after that one. At first, I'll admit I assumed it was guilt, and I very nearly told her to keep her pity, that the Brants didn't need it and weren't for sale. But it wasn't pity. That was the thing that slowly knocked me off balance. She had quietly, without any fuss, and without telling me until it was done, used her considerable connections to get Nora's case file placed in front of one of the very best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the entire country. She was careful, almost fierce, about not simply paying for it, because somehow she'd already understood that I would never in 100 years accept a handout. Instead, she had done the one thing all her money could do that wasn't an insult. She had opened a door that I could never, ever have opened on my own, and gotten my girl seen by someone who could actually, truly help her. And then she just kept showing up. She'd swing by the shop in the late afternoons after Nora was out of school. And at first my Nora was shy of her, this tall, fancy lady who smelled like expensive things. And then Nora, who I swear has never once in her whole life met a stranger she considered a stranger for longer than 4 minutes, started showing her the drawings, and explaining at great length how the cars worked, getting most of it gloriously wrong. And one afternoon, I came walking out of the bay, wiping grease off my hands, and stopped dead, because there was Margot Cross, Chief Executive Officer, worth more money than my entire zip code put together, sitting on an upturned 5-gallon bucket in the middle of my leaky garage, in what was clearly a very expensive skirt, having a deeply serious negotiation with an 8-year-old about whether cats or dogs were the superior animal. And losing the argument, badly, and not appearing to mind it one bit. I want to be very careful about how I tell you this next part, because it is the truest thing in this whole story, and I would rather not cheapen it by rushing. I did not fall for Margot Cross because she was rich. Lord knows, I had just spent the better part of 2 months being looked down upon by the exact things her money had slowly turned her into. And she most certainly did not fall for me because I was some noble, salt-of-the-earth poor man. She'd have been disgusted by that, and frankly, so would I. No, what actually happened between us was so much slower and so much realer than any of that. She kept coming back because, for the first time in her entire armored adult life, she had stumbled into 2 people who did not want one single thing from her. Not her money, not her power, not her name, not her connections, not anything she could write a check for. 2 people who would just let her sit on an overturned bucket in a dirty garage and be, for an hour, an actual human being. And I let her in, slowly and carefully, 1 cautious inch at a time, because I stood there week after week and watched a cold, hard, frightened woman thaw out into a warm one right in front of my eyes, and because my daughter, who is without any exaggeration the finest and shrewdest judge of human character I have ever personally known, looked that woman over very carefully and decided on her own that she loved her. The surgery happened that winter, and Nora came through it. I'm going to say that one more time, slowly, because there are still mornings I wake up and can't quite believe that I get to. My daughter came through her surgery, and her small brave heart is whole and strong now, and she is going to grow all the way up. The money from the Lamborghini, because yes, I did sell it, exactly as I'd promised her I would, that money paid for the 100 things insurance dug in its heels and fought us on, paid for the long recovery, paid for the simple, unfamiliar breathing room that a single father scraping by never, ever gets to have. And Margot was right there in that surgical waiting room with me the whole time. Not as anything official yet, we hadn't put any words on it. Just as a person who plainly could not have been anywhere else in the world that day. She held my hand through the longest and most terrifying hours of my entire life, and she didn't fill them up with talk, didn't offer me a single empty, comfortable lie, because by then she had finally learned the one thing all her money had never once taught her, that simply showing up and staying and being quiet next to someone in the dark is worth more than anything a person can ever buy. We were married a little over a year later, small, at the shop of all places, with the roof finally fixed, because that turned out to be her one absolute non-negotiable insistence, that she be allowed to pay to fix that leaking roof, and after everything I decided I could let her have that one. Nora stood up front and held the rings, beaming, in a brand new dress, and the woman who had once looked at my daughter like an inconvenient stain became her mother. Not a replacement for the one who'd left. Nora and I are very, very careful with each other about that, always have been. But a mom. A real one. The kind who shows up and stays, which I've come to understand is the only kind that has ever actually counted for anything. Here is the thing I turn over in my mind, late at night, more than any other part of it. Margot had every single thing that money could ever buy a person, and she was the loneliest, hardest, most walled-off human being I had ever met in my life. And the thing that finally, after 20 years, managed to reach all the way through to her. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture, and it wasn't a bigger fortune, and it wasn't anything that could be bought or sold at all. It was a child's crayon drawing taped to a leaking wall, and a tired man who took a cruel bet for the only reason worth taking one. She told me once, a long time afterward, lying awake herself, That the day she walked into my shop fully expecting to feel like a loser handing over those keys, and instead found out what I was going to do with that car and why, that was the very first day in 30 long years that she could remember who she had been, once, before the armor. A frightened kid with nothing in her pockets, who only ever really wanted one single thing in all the world, for somebody, anybody, to show up for her and stay, and in the end she got to be exactly that somebody for my Nora. And I am as sure as I am of anything that it healed something down inside her that all the money on this earth had never once been able to touch. I make a decent living. I'll never be a rich man myself, and the strange truth is that marrying a billionaire changed precisely nothing about the way I work, because I still roll up that bay door every single morning, and I still find the cracked $6 hose instead of selling some frightened person an $11,000 engine they don't need, because that is exactly who I am, and because my Nora is always, always watching how her daddy does things. There's a version of this whole story where I let that cruel bet turn me bitter, where I let it make me hate the cold rich woman who'd made it, where I snatched up that Lamborghini and gloated in her face and roared off down the road feeling like I'd finally won something. And there is simply no version of that story where my daughter winds up with a mother, and a hard-frightened woman gets her own buried heart handed back to her, and I end up with a partner who holds my hand without a word in hospital waiting rooms. I am so deeply glad that I was just too tired that day to gloat. I'm so glad I simply told the plain truth about a little girl's crayon drawing instead. I picked telling the truth. I'd pick it every single time. So let me ask you just one thing before you go. A woman walked into my life and looked at me, and my little girl like the two of us were nothing at all. And underneath every last plate of that heavy armor, it turned out, was a frightened child who had simply forgotten, somewhere along the way, how to let another living soul show up for her. And it has left me wondering, ever since, just how many of the hardest, coldest, most difficult people that all of us are so quick to write off at a glance are really only somebody who got hurt so badly, so young, that they built themselves a wall and then slowly forgot there had ever been a door in it. So, here is what I honestly want to know from you tonight. Have you ever watched somebody you had completely and totally written off turn out to be something else entirely underneath, once something finally cracked the shell? Or have you ever been that person yourself? Tell me about it down in the comments. I read every single one of them, and I would truly love to know. And if this story got to you tonight, if you believe, the way I have come to believe it right down to the ground, that you can never truly tell what's hiding underneath a person's armor until the day something finally cracks it open, then do me that one small favor. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, drop a like so the next person can find their way here, leave your own story down in the comments, and I'll see you in the very next one. Trust me, it's a good one.